Welcome back to the Athlete's Edge podcast. On today's episode, we're going to discuss some misconceptions when it comes to the gym and how parents can prioritise the long term over the short term. So we're seeing some recent examples of athletes looking to cut some gym back as training ramps up with the season approaching, and parents are starting to prioritise their kid playing multiple sports instead of their child being actually prepared for the demands of playing multiple sports. What is the role of the parent when it comes to supporting their child long term instead of just giving into them in the short term and allowing them to play multiple sports all at once?
Well, a potential reframe there is, instead of parents maybe thinking about being a parent, even maybe a friend, and doing what is maybe easy or is going to be more popular from the kid's perspective, parents for me should be thinking about how are they the performance director for their child, because they will have the most say, obviously living under the same roof, in terms of the attitudes, behaviours and the actual doing for that child. So I think if they were then a performance director type mindset, would they maybe approach some of the decisions a little bit differently? Maybe another reframe is looking at it from, if it was someone else's kid, what would you be advising? And it's that whole, sometimes when we offer our, someone else advice, we offer better advice than maybe what we give ourselves. So it's maybe another way of looking at it to say, okay, what maybe would be better for short term, but definitely with that long term lens. I think that short term kind of like mindset analogy we're talking about is the old ice cream analogy around what's easy in the short term to make them feel good versus long term. And the ice cream is, it'd be easy to have ice cream for dinner as opposed to something maybe that takes more time and is healthier and that the kid doesn't necessarily want to eat. But obviously you wouldn't give your kid ice cream for dinner all the time. So you make decisions that are better for them long term. And that's because they don't have the actual brain capacity. We don't develop that prefrontal cortex fully until we're 25. So it's our job as adults to actually be rational, think long term and make these decisions for our kids because they're not capable to do it. And then the last point around the long term is there's an element of the hard work, the boring work, the stuff that takes time isn't overnight, and that's a lot of the gym type work, a lot of the technique, and even then, like, they'll go through growth spurts and they'll lose some of it. It's the stuff that makes the skill and the sport fun. So we've got to do an element of the boring and the hard in order to actually enjoy the sport. And if we cut out the boring and the hard just for enjoyment, I guarantee in the long run, they're going to suffer.
Yeah, 100% agree. Seen it firsthand. So why is there such a misconception around the gym?
Well, I think some of it's justified because when we talk gym, there's a lot of shit gym training being done. So I understand from a parent and a coach perspective that there is some apprehension around it, as there probably should be, but which is why I always said, I don't believe anyone, single person, should train unsupervised in the gym, myself included. And I know a lot about gym training, but I don't like training without other people in there or being watched to get help. Because it's how you do it. There's no point doing things at a higher intensity or more of it if it's the wrong thing. It's just you're just either building intensity on the wrong movement skill and qualities you want to train, or you're doing more of it to reinforce the wrong thing. I had this chat with a swim coach recently. It was a really good chat around, it's about doing just things better, not necessarily more or higher intensity of it, just do the skill better. They talk about after a competition, their main competition for the year, they do 9 weeks where they do like a 25 metre swim and then they rest for 2 minutes. And then the session might go for less than an hour, which they normally do, way more than that, and 2 hours of training, because it's like, get this skill right and you don't move on. You stay on that skill until you get it right. So because of how gym training is done and that apprehension, the parents, I think, see gym as this extra load. So it's like a third or fourth sport, which I think obviously then means, okay, well, I've got to cut something back. It makes sense to reduce that. There's also the approach that gym, I think, is seen as that kind of classic bodybuilding or powerlifting approach. So sort of links into my last point that it's just about getting big or getting strong. Therefore, maybe I don't think it's the best thing for my kid, or maybe we can cut back on some of that because the sport demands are increasing. Off the back of all that, the fear that it's really fatiguing and then my kid's not going to play well on the weekend. A conversation we have all the time is, I've got this coming up, it's, this big event, which in the grand scheme of things probably means nothing. But, it's the biggest tournament for the year at 15. Should I cut back this week? So there's always this fear of kind of, being fatigued and not being able to perform in that moment.
Which again, I think sort of links into some of the short-term, long-term. They've got this such short-term goal around it. Might be a rep team or some tournament, like you said, but they sacrifice a lot of their gym work, their sprint work to sort of taper off and feel fresh, but they're actually not getting the stimulus they need to improve for when it does matter in the next 2 to 3 years when they do enter that pathway.
Well, I actually watched the reel yesterday, Libby Trickett, so four-time Olympic gold medalist, or four-time Olympic medalist, I think it's gold medalist. So one of the greats of Australian swimming, and her kid's 10 or 11 now swimming, and she said actually to one of the mums that's involved at the swim club, because she's a pretty anxious kid apparently, and she's like, I want to look at maybe entering some more of like the local competitions. How do I go about that for my kid? And the lady responded, I'll look at some of her times and stuff to see where she's at and stuff, and then get back to you. Because Libby had no clue what her daughter's times actually were. And she said, and then the lady made the comment, this is why it's awesome having some the high level parents themselves involved, because they don't give a crap about this stuff. And she goes, it made me think, and it was really interesting around why do parents care, and this is Libby's point, at 10, 11, even at 15, in terms of the results then and there. She said, there's not one thing, she goes, I've been to multiple Olympic Games, there is not one example where that mattered. It's about the habits and the skills and the foundations and everything that they're developing now in order to get really good at 17, 18, 20, 25, 30. Whereas if you're trying to be an elite 15-year-old, you've got to take too many shortcuts, that whole focus the short term, you're going to get found out.
And that's why I think the issue is now the kind of social media world that we live in is the comparison that every child sort of does, and it's kind of human nature. You want to compare yourselves to people who are, yes, they might be the same biological age, but as we've talked about in the past, doesn't mean they're the same maturity from a physical standpoint. Obviously some peak a bit earlier, go through their growth spurts a bit earlier, whereas others go a bit later, and yet they're still comparing themselves, and that's why they do lack confidence at times when they're 14, 15 if they don't make a rep team, because it's the end of the world because the person they're competing with did.
Yeah. Well, of the 4 kids in the last 3 years we've worked with that have been drafted, I can say none of them were the best player at 16, to the point that I don't know if they would have been in the top 5 at 16.
So we've just covered the misconceptions around the gym. So how is the gym protective, and what would your message be to parents around that?
So if we talk about sort of building the hardware, building the armour, so the gym as a stress creates an adaptation where we know, because of the resistance, things like our muscles and our tendons and our bones and our joints will get stronger, which can only be a good thing when we're going to expose our body to intensities and the volumes that sport will do. When people think about gym being this load, yes, it is a load, but this is where it is a lot more controlled, and our ability to then teach and expose in a controlled manner the body to stress makes it a lot safer option than the sport itself. So had example early in the week where someone had a big tournament on the weekend, pretty sore, didn't do the gym Monday, but then turned up to speed on the Tuesday, which then made it really hard to adapt the session, because speed is speed. So we can do some different skills and stuff, but whereas the gym, for example, we can go from plan A through to plan Z, which could be a stretching session. So it allows us, because it's so controlled, to adapt, and we can then match a little bit more to what the athlete needs, not just from a long-term perspective, but in that moment to keep it safe and to keep them recovering and moving forward, not taking 2 or 3 steps back. Which sort of links into the long-term athlete development. So if we're getting stronger, we're moving better, well then we're going to allow progression down the road that they can get involved in, more intensive type training, more volume with their training, because they're more efficient, they're stronger, their tissues are more resilient, they're going to be able to do more with less risk of injury, particularly when we start getting into the specifics. So it's not just about, doing bicep curls to get stronger biceps so you don't hurt your bicep, or leg extensions to get stronger quads and quad tendons. It's about how then you link movement together, and the areas that need to be really stable and strong are, and the areas that can be flexible and bendy can be as well. And that's what essentially training is all about. That's why I guess our point of difference is it's not just about squat strength. People see that we squat and we do these movements, but it's all the other stuff that links it together that is actually really important. So one example, talking to someone around like chronic hamstrings, lots of sport at the moment, so hasn't been getting to the gym as much, but this person really struggles with the core control and the pelvic control. Funny enough, her hamstrings have been really chronically sore. Well, what increases the load on the hamstring? Pelvic tilt. So if you're not working on actually correcting that and doing all the right work in the background, you're essentially creating more of an issue, then sport stresses it, and then you get sore. So when it comes to what athletes should be doing, what we've discussed the last couple of weeks is this net positive, net negative kind of balance between essentially health. Sport is a negative stress on the body. Great for a lot of things, but in terms of physically, it is demanding, it breaks down the body. The gym, done right, is a positive. So it adds back to the system to help create a more durable, sustainable athlete. So if you increase sport and reduce this, you are going to come unstuck at some point. And if anything, what I would do is, so if it's my kid, I'm saying, well, let's keep this the same or drop it back. Let's increase this, because this will long term keep you healthier and progressing. Whereas this is nice now, but this is only going to essentially break you if we keep going the way we're going.
And that's where I think most athletes have the ratio backwards, where they go too much sport, not enough gym. Our general rule is that sort of 1-to-1 kind of ratio. So why is that so important as seasons start to ramp up?
Well, and just on that point, so are we seeing injuries go down or go up? So if you said which one's the right way of doing it, it's like, well, do we want our kids do we want to bow down to them and let them make all the decisions now because that's what they want, knowing that injuries are worse local level and at the highest level, the highest they've ever been. So, yeah, it's not working. So we've got to do something differently.
How many first-year draftees are coming in and breaking down with, chronic injuries, stress fractures, all the lot?
Yep, just too much of the sport. And I guess that's where some of the changes we're bringing in is going to either address it or people won't work with us. And I'm kind of happy with that. I'd rather do the right thing. So the 1-to-1 rule, it's sort of that positive, negative kind of mindset. If you think of, sport and training being all these constant outputs, well, we need some input to balance that out. So if we talk output, so for every hour of training or playing, we've got an hour that we're spending putting in. Now that can be our gym, that can be some of our, speed work, that can be your stretching, your extra recovery, all that sort of stuff. Your yoga, Pilates, like all that stuff is your input so that your output can be better.
Which I think, the issue with the people doing multiple sports at the same time is they don't have enough of a chance to actually work on the inputs to increase their output. They're so focused on the output that they sacrifice the input, which leads to diminishing returns.
Absolutely. It's just a matter of when they plateau and go backwards. And it's hard because at that point, like from my perspective, it becomes really hard to fix because now there's a lot of, bad movements and, poor movement strategies, poor skills that are ingrained that now get harder and harder to undo, to then correct, to make the athlete better. Whereas if we got ahead of that, potentially we have a better outcome down the road. I guess if you think about sort of like, my season's increasing, I want to cut back the gym. That would be like saying I'm going to drive my car faster, but removing the brakes to do so. So it's all well and good to get going, but at some point you're going to have to hit that first corner and you want your brakes. So yes, all this sport right now might seem great, but at some point the brakes are going to come off and you're going to hit that corner and it's like, how's it going to handle it? And that's where we're seeing sort of athletes fall short. So, for me, it's a non-negotiable in and around if they're doing 3 training sessions a week for their sports, sports, then to me it's 3 gym sessions. It's how am I doing the right input to get those outputs that we want.